Call our meeting to order this morning. This is the Kent County Board of Commissioners meeting. Today is Thursday, June 28th, 2018. The time is 8:30 a.m. We'll begin this morning with roll call.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Commissioners Long.
Here.
Antoine.
Here.
Morgan. Jones.
Here.
Vice Chair Bolter.
Here.
Steck.
Here.
Onstein.
Here.
Voorhees.
Present.
Coleman.
Here.
Breedy. Here. Mast.
Here.
Melton.
Present.
Hennessy.
Here.
Talon.
Here.
Volkowski.
Present.
Womack. Horndike.
Present.
Skaggs.
Here.
Chair Salfeld.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 17 members present, 2 absent. You have a quorum.
Thank you. We will next move to agenda item 3 and 4, and I will call on Commissioner Bolter to lead us in an invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Good morning. Well, when you're asked to do this, sometimes you Google to find some words of inspiration. So this is not a prayer to start out, but I did find this and I thought it was a pretty good quote. Live simply, love generously, care deeply, speak kindly, and leave the rest to God. Ronald Reagan. Let's bow our heads. Dear God, we thank you for all our blessings. We ask that you help us to see the good in each other, help us to find common ground in areas that unite us. Guide us to make good decisions on behalf of our constituents, and watch over all those who put their lives on the line to protect us each day. May we all serve with calm minds and sincere hearts. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will move next to agenda item number 5, which is the special order of business. And we will call on Stephen Bland with Raymond Robson. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me here today. It has been my pleasure to serve as Kent County's independent auditor for the past 10 years, and I'm here today to present the results of the December 31st, 2017 financial and single audits. I believe each of the commissioners have a copy in front of them of the comprehensive annual financial report. For the record, this information is publicly available, I believe, both on the Kent County website and then also on the State of Michigan website for any citizens who wish to look this information up. There are a few things that I want to just briefly overview and explain about the audit process, and then I'll get into a few of the specific results. The first is what it is that you as a County Board of Commissioners engage our firm as independent auditors to do for you on an annual basis. This comprehensive annual financial report represents the information put together by Kent County Management. It's over almost 250 pages of financial information intended to be transparent about the way in which the county has conducted its financial operations. It contains all of the required financial data that the state of Michigan mandates all local governments to include, and a good bit of voluntary data that the county has put in to take this beyond being just a set of basic financial statements and make it a comprehensive annual financial report. There is 10 years of trend data in here. There's information on budget and actual results, and there's a great overview at the beginning, a transmittal letter for management and management's discussion and analysis about the results of financial information. At 250 pages, I don't really expect any one person to want to read all of it, but there's something in there for everyone, depending on what you care most about, how the county uses your citizens' resources. This report covers it all. And out of those 200 roughly 50 pages, there's really only 1 or 2 pieces of paper in there that are our responsibility as auditors, and that's the independent auditor's opinion. What you've asked us to do is to give an opinion whether or not the information in this report is reliable, something that you can use to make solid financial decisions. And we have issued a clean or unmodified opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that we can give, indicating that we believe these financial statements are free of any material misstatements. Now, it's important that I point out to you every year, those of you who've been on the commission for a while have heard this speech many times, the nature of an audit is such such that we don't look at every single dollar of every single transaction that goes through the county's books. It takes a large staff a whole year to account for your operations. We have a small team on site for a couple of months to go through and do the audit. So our audit is designed to look for potential errors or mistakes that are of a larger dollar amount. We'll tell you anything we find, big or small, but the audit's designed to look for the big things, and because of that, there will always be a small chance that something could slip through and not be detected. We have no reason to think that happened, but it's a normal limitation of the audit process, and it's important that we remind you of that each year. So again, to recap, the part from us in here, our opinion, clean, unmodified. We believe these financial statements are something you can, in fact, rely on. A couple of things in this report I want to point out to you that are different this year. The first thing that's different this year is the location of the budget versus actual statements. We talked last year that with the system conversion, with the fact that the county's fiscal year is complicated, some of your funds operate on one fiscal year while most of them operate on a calendar year, it was becoming difficult to reconcile the way that you budget with the way that this report is required to be organized. We made another step forward this year in trying to clarify that reconciliation, but doing that required us to put it in a different section of the report. So if you're looking for the budget and actual comparisons, they're still here, but they're now behind a tab that's labeled Required Supplementary Information. It's about the second tab up from the bottom. So it starts on page 127. Same information, just a different location in the report. So if you're looking for that's where you'll find it. And I will point out that the most important budget, the one that you obviously spend the most of your time on, it's shown on page 130, is the general fund. You budgeted $148 million in revenue. You came ahead of that at $155 million. You budgeted to spend $138 million in general fund programs. You came under budget and only spent $134 million. In the end, you had approved the county to dip into its reserves to the tune of up to $6.5 million, and that was not necessary. In fact, you managed to increase the reserve slightly by just over $1 million. So all in all, it was a very favorable financial year for the general fund, ending the year with about almost $71 million in fund balance. Now, I will point out, and this is in the notes to the financial statements, that you have adopted a policy on a minimum level that you need to maintain in your general fund balance. And that's an important policy because the county, because of the timing of property taxes, you have to operate a very good chunk of your fiscal year in advance of collecting the tax revenues that you use to fund these operations. And so because of that, you've set a policy of at least 40% of the next year's budget, including expenditures and outgoing transfers, needs to be in reserve at the end of the year. And if you ever fall short of that, you'll take corrective action in the next budget year. You fell just barely short of that at the end of 2017. It was 39.5% or so. So very correctable. That's what the policy's there for, to give you that warning signal so that you can take appropriate action in the new fiscal year. So not at all alarming, but something that you'll want to keep an eye on because, as I said, it's a lot to do to run a county for 6 months or so before the tax dollars for that year start coming in. The other thing I would point out in the report this year that's new is that we told you for the last couple of years that the county would be required eventually to record on your books the cost of providing retiree health care benefits. And we said that was coming. This is the year that has been reported in the financial statements for the first time. And the way the accounting standards work is we take the total amount of money that you've set aside, and you have set aside a substantial sum already, and you'll continue to add to that, and we compare that to the amount that the actuaries say you should have set aside as of this date. And any deficiency between those is called a net OPEB liability. And this is the first year that net OPEB liability is reflected in the county's financials. You can find the dollar amount of that also in that required supplementary information section. The specific page that has that number is 139. And that liability is about $33 million that's been added to the books. Nothing has changed in the plan, but this is the first year the accounting standards require that liability to be reported. While $33 million is certainly a lot of money, and I know the county's got a great plan towards funding that over time, I would point out that just a page or two earlier, you can see that the pension plan, which has been on the books for a few years, has fortunately this most recent year gotten into a position of being slightly overfunded. And it's slightly overfunded to the tune of $36 million. So the great news is the pension being a little overfunded and the OPEB being a little underfunded have actually pretty well netted each other out. So this is a great situation to be in. I'll tell you statewide, and this is not a statistic statistical sample by any means, but statewide, we see pension plans being roughly 75 to 80% funded. You're at 105, which is great. We see OPEB plans being 10, 15, 20% funded, and you're well up over 44%. So you're really ahead of the curve. And for those two to have a net liability that's actually negative, it's a small asset, is very unusual. And it speaks volumes to the progress you've made thus far, and I know you're not done continuing to move forward with that. So those are the two major changes in the financial statements this year. With that 250 pages, there's obviously lots of other info, and I'll come back and give you a chance to ask any specific questions you've got in a moment. But those are the main things I wanted to touch base on this report. The second document that you have in front of you is a much thinner one. It's called Single Audit Act Compliance. And this report actually contains two very important pieces of information. The first is, did we as auditors find anything in the way that the county keeps its books and records? Looking not at the results, but at the process behind the results. Did anything come to our attention that we think represents a material weakness, meaning a problem that really needs to have corrective action taken, or a smaller item we call a significant deficiency, which is smaller than material, but still important enough to require action? So we have that opportunity to communicate. We know what the results were, clean report on the financials, but is there anything procedurally that we feel you should address? And in addition, I should say, this report also then lists out all the federal grants that the county administered during the year. And as is typical for large governments, the county actually receives a fair amount of funding through the federal government, $26 million or so scheduled out there. And because you receive those federal dollars, we're required to do a compliance audit to see did you follow all of the rules that the feds attach anytime you receive federal grant money. And there are up to 12 different compliance requirements that we have to test on each individual major program. And this is an opportunity for us then to report on the results of the single audit and say, how did that one go? Out of everything we looked at systemically across the way the county keeps its books and records and the way it administers federal grants, we had only two matters that rose to the level of being reported as findings, and they're shown on pages 13 and 14. I just very briefly want to point them out to you. On page 13, we have one matter related to the financial statements themselves. And frankly, it's an odd issue to try and explain. The county accounted for its property tax adjustments and collections correct in total, but had a misallocation between funds. It was caught during the audit and fixed. So the grand total was correct, that putting it in individual buckets needed some resolution. We have corrected that. Because the individual buckets involved have much lower thresholds, this met the technical definition of a material audit adjustment. It is not really that significant of an issue. It was an easy fix. It's been taken care of. And if you want to look to an underlying cause, it's been a busy year with the system conversion, with staffing changes, and the finance department has been working very hard in a number of areas. Frankly, this one slipped through the cracks. It's been fixed. There's really no further corrective action necessary on that one. The second issue then on the next page, page 14, was the one item that we had related to the single audit. We identified this to be a matter of immaterial noncompliance, which means technically you didn't follow one of the rules related to federal grant administration, but we didn't feel it impacted our overall opinion. We can still say you complied in all material respects. And this item relates to the method being used for subrecipient monitoring. When the county receives a federal grant and passes that on to another entity, you have a certain obligation to follow up on how that other entity is spending the federal dollars. And the county did a lot of steps very well. There were a few additional requirements to kind of finish that process through that were lacking. And we have recommended some enhancements to that subrecipient monitoring. Frankly, the fact that you're doing subrecipient monitoring at all puts you ahead of many entities that are in this situation, but there are still some additional action steps, and they're laid out in our report here, and we're confident that management can take the necessary steps in the next year. Page 15 lists the three findings that we brought to your attention a year ago. All three of those have been resolved, so none of them repeated. So that's the news you want to hear. Every year the audit's going to probably find something. This is too large and too complex of an organization to hope to get absolutely everything perfect. But when you see that each of the three matters that occurred did not repeat in the same nature this year, that shows that you're taking the appropriate action to fix things where appropriate and move forward. The last document that I want to point out to you, and then I will turn things back over to ask you what you'd like to know more about, is the separate letter that you get from us. It's addressed to those charged with governance. And this is sort of our overall summary of how the audit process went. The first few pages are fairly boilerplate. They just indicate our job is to audit the books and records. It's the county's job to maintain those books and records. That the financial statements by necessity include certain estimates because we can't wait for final numbers to come in. They all appeared reasonable and appropriate. And when we get back to about the 6th page, it's labeled page A1, that's where we get into our comments and recommendations. And I just want to clarify here that comments and recommendations are different than findings. So a finding is something that we believe makes it at least reasonably possible that a material misstatement or a material noncompliance could occur, or that if not material, it's still important enough to warrant board attention. The items in this letter fall below that threshold. We call them other matters, and it's the nickel and dime recommendations. It's the things that we still expect management to work for, and you have management's response to each of the items, but we do not clarify or classify these, I should say, as actual findings. And the items here relate to continuing to strengthen the controls over budgeting with the new software, continuing to better account for the details of what balances are held for individuals and agency funds, continuing to stay on top of the timeliness of bank reconciliations. We know the software contributed greatly to that. There are some older account balances that haven't been adjusted in some time. Again, software conversion has certainly impacted that. Final independent review of some of the work papers that are put together for the audit. We know folks were pulled fairly thin through that process. And just some timely transaction processing, again, with competing priorities this year. It was understandable, but each of those are detailed out there along with management's plan for corrective action. So to recap the overall process, we want to extend our significant thanks to all of the county personnel. This is a tremendous undertaking. The county is a huge organization. There's a lot going on. We got the audit out on time. The due date is still a few days off, but we actually issued this on June 13. So it's a great feeling to be in. While there were a couple of findings, in the grand scheme of things, I would not put them real high on the worry scale, and we're looking forward to another great year next year. With that, I'll turn it back to you and ask what you'd like to have more information.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. We'll answer or ask, have our commissioners ask questions. I actually want to start. You talked about the pension and the OPEB and the status of Kent County. Sounds like it's pretty good. Can you give me kind of your assessment of top 10, top 25? Do you have any idea where we stand?
Sure.
As it relates to that?
So the biggest challenge with pension and OPEB for governments over the last few years is that everyone has given lip service to the idea that they want to fund those benefits for their employees. And so I don't think any government has intentionally not done that. The challenge has been making assumptions about what will happen with the dollars you set aside. And a lot of governments have been overly optimistic. They said if we set money aside today, we're going to earn 8-9% interest on that money. And it's just frankly not been happening. That's the reason so many governments fell behind in their funding status. Kent has a freestanding plan. A, has not been tied to some of the larger systems that have tried to make those estimates. And B, has made a little more aggressive funding and said we're going to do above and beyond what the actuaries have requested, especially on the OPEB front. And because of that, I would estimate, again, I haven't done a statistical sample, that you're easily in the top 10% of governments in terms of the combined funding status. And I mean, if that's something we wanted to look up, it's all public information. The state's actually just beginning this year to start having greater degrees of public transparency to make that easier to compare. But I would be, frankly, very surprised if you're not in the top 10%, certainly of the larger governments. You may find somebody who's only got 3 employees, and it's easy to keep up with that. But for a large government, you're doing great.
Excellent, thank you. Commissioner Stack.
Good morning, Steve.
Good morning.
Just a quick question, again, following up on the report on the OPEB status and the pension status. That's great. We're 36 million plus under the current analysis on the pension. We're about 33 million short on the OPEB. But those funds are not interchangeable, are they?
They are not. But the good news is when you're over on one, that gives you some flexibility to back off on the contributions.
On an ongoing funding basis.
And then what it frees up in resources for funding pension, you can then invest into funding OPEB. So while you can't transfer one to the other, it does provide budgetary relief over time as you work to balance those.
Other questions among commissioners? Commissioner Vonk.
Thank you, Chair. Yesterday, Steve, you talked about the transition between the authority, the airport authority, and the county. We got our different hats on this morning.
Sure.
So could you talk a little bit about that this morning as well?
Absolutely. So what we were talking about yesterday at the airport authority was that was their first full fiscal year being separate from the county. And so the same is true here from the county. If your first full year of not having airport operations in the financial statements. So the airport authority is reported in here as a component unit. It shows up in a different spot in the financials than it used to, although we talked about that last year, so it's not technically a change from the prior year. Most of my comments yesterday were about the improvements that the airport has made as they have gotten onto their own systems, and frankly, the airport had relied fairly heavily on the infrastructure of the county's very strong financial systems. And so a year ago, we had reported to the airport that they had some deficiencies to make up, and they have made that progress during the last year on their own, kind of building up their own systems to replicate the benefit they were getting from the county. So to the extent that the county continues to be financially accountable and has a relationship with the authority, it should be good news to you. And I do want to point out that the very last paragraph in our list of comments and recommendations, I didn't say it before, but it is just a reminder that there are separate letters like this for each of the standalone audits that are done for the county's various agencies, including the pension and the VEBA. And so if you're interested in seeing our separate comments that were issued for those organizations, all of those are also publicly available to you as well. Was there anything else, Commissioner, that you wanted to cover?
That's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Commissioner Hennessy.
When the reporting requirements changed for the pension claims and health care, we had several years notice. I understand that there's a lot of financial changes still taking place. I was at one of our nonprofit boards and heard about finance changes that will be coming down the pipe and reporting in a couple of years. And that was specific, and I don't know if that will affect us at all. It was specifically where like government grants or monies would then be reported as contributions in the future.
So what you're referring to there from a nonprofit board, there's a separate accounting standards board for nonprofits than there is for governments. So government rules are always changing, but what you're talking about is specific to nonprofits and won't actually directly impact Kent County.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Womack.
Yes, Steve, I want to thank you for that update on our audit. But when we talk about this immaterial non-compliance,
yes,
as to continual care program under the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, you told us there's some non-compliance, but if as commissioners we wanted to get an email with more details about which organization, the sub-recipient this was, because we get a lot of organizations, programs, and departments that come in here throughout the year and tell us what a wonderful job they're doing, and then when we have to set the budget for the next year, you know, we're going on some of the material that we have about these departments or organizations or their sub-recipients even. So I'm trying to find out from you or even from our county administrator, is there a way that we as commissioners can get the total details?
Absolutely.
That we know our public information.
Absolutely.
We'd
be happy to provide that.
Yeah, and I just comment on that. One of the points that they made was related to our subrecipient for HUD COC. And the large one there is the Community Rebuilders Organization that you're speaking of probably. So we can provide you with whatever detail necessary so that it complies or correlates back to the comment that he made in the audit.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Britt. Thank you, Steve.
Commissioner Jones.
Thank you, Chair. As Chair of the Finance Committee, thank you very much for your work on this. I get a chance to meet with the auditors every year and share my thoughts on the direction and the focus. There's one point that I would like you to circle back on,
sure,
which is every year, being as large as we are, there is a rotating deep dive. Can you just touch upon the deep dive you did?
Sure.
And share that with everyone?
So one of the requirements of professional standards is to, the exact quote is to build in an element of unpredictability to the audit. And the idea there is, we've been your auditors for 10 years now, and we never want to get to a place where management knows exactly what's coming during the audit so that they can prepare and make sure that, you know, they only put their effort in the spots that they know we're looking. So there are certain things we're going to look at every year. We're never going to skip auditing cash. We're never going to skip auditing property taxes. They're too big, too pervasive. They get tested every year. A lot of smaller areas, smaller departments that may not have a material impact on the overall financial statements get tested on a rotating basis. And we very intentionally do not share that rotation with management so that it is a surprise to them. Now, one of the things that definitely added to the ability to say this was an unpredictable audit from management's perspective was shifting responsibilities even within the finance department. Having new people in new roles who had never worked on areas definitely contributed to that. We also added some new team members. We have the same core team, but we added some new members to the audit team who approach things from a slightly different angle to try and identify that. So every year we do have that list of items, and I'm sorry I don't have with me the specific ones that were selected on this engagement. As you can imagine, I've been at a lot of counties in the last few weeks making presentations, and they're all blending together. But I can tell you that we absolutely did give some substantive thought to selecting 5 or 6 different areas that wouldn't have been tested as in-depth in the prior year and digging into those differently this year. And the results you have in front of you are inclusive of everything that we looked at and went into detail this year.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions by the commissioners? I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much, Stephen.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Okay, we move next to agenda item number 6, which is public comment. I know we have quite a few people here today, so welcome to Kent County. Public comment, we do follow rules in Kent County, and there's 2 ways we can proceed with public comment. One is 1 or 2 members, I know we have a group here that I think is together, is entitled to have 1 or 2 spokesmen come forward, and we'll allot you 15 minutes to address the commission at that time. Alternatively, you can have multiple people come forward. In that case, we would ask that we do require that you state your name, state your address. You would have 3 minutes. And I want to stress this, the rules state that we do not allow public comment that is unduly repetitious. So if that were the case, we would need to move on. You know, and the way to handle that is if somebody has said something and you agree with that, it's certainly fine to come forward, state your name, address, say that you concur with the prior speakers, but we just don't want to have the same thing stated over and over again per our rules. So I guess I would begin by asking the group, do you want to proceed with having 15 minutes and having 1 or 2 spokesmen, or would you like to have more people come forward? Okay, all right. So we will open the public comment by allowing people to come forward. Again, state your name or address. You have 3 minutes. You may proceed.
5 minutes.
No, 3 minutes.
That's not what it says on the website.
It's 3 minutes under our rules.
You guys just took 15 minutes of the budget.
It's not, that was not public comment, sir. 3 minutes, please come forward. Please. Yeah.
Buenos dias, good morning. I'm the Reverend Justo Gonzalez II. I am the Southwest Area Minister for the United Church of Christ, which means that I provide and resource 48 United Church of Christ churches throughout the West Michigan area. I stand before you, 1, as a Latino, 2, as an American citizen, 3, as a pastor, dismayed at the reality that our country, at least the country that I've known for the last 57 years, seems to be very quickly disappearing before us. The forced separation and kidnapping of children on behalf of the government, whether instituted by ICE or Homeland Security, Border and Customs Patrol, is simply unacceptable. And we would like you to, and I understand it's a federal issue, but I also understand that you have a voice and power, and I need you to hear that nuestra comunidad, our community, cannot sit back and simply wait in your silence. We need people to speak up, to voice their concerns, and I also understand that the contract that you have with ICE, you really don't have much of an opportunity to review it and reaffirm it. It happens automatically. But I want to invite you to make a statement, to dare to challenge that and make sure that before we continuously authorize ICE to terrorize our communities, our children, our families, whether documented or undocumented, because no one is illegal. As a person of faith, I truly believe that. And most people are not undocumented, they're underdocumented.
You have 1 minute.
We all have papers. You may not like them. The federal government may not like them, but we all have papers. We all have birth certificates. We all have national IDs, which are the equivalent of our Social Security system. So I stand asking, one, that this contract come before you and come before the public so that we can give input and simply not allow it to continuously renew and terrorize your constituents, our sisters and brothers, and our families. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm John Kennedy, and I apologize because I'm going to break the flow here, and it's not that I don't have views on this issue as well, but I'm here to talk about another agenda item that you have, which is the early childhood program. And I certainly wanted to have an opportunity to just express my support for that request to increase the millage. And our family is investing very heavily with Grand Rapids Public Schools.
Mr. Kennedy, did you mind if I interrupt you? We have members
Ma'am, please don't interrupt him during his public comment.
We have here a bigger issue that we would like to
Ma'am, please do not interrupt him with his comment.
Mr. Kennedy, you
Ma'am, please step back. Okay, deputies, would you please remove this woman from the chambers?
I know, I understand.
Oh, that's not.
Ma'am, we're going to follow our orders. I'm going to tell you listen right now.
It's only going to be a minute. It's only going to be 1 minute.
All right. I'm going to order this meeting suspended and ask the deputies to clear the court.
You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Please. Commission, we're temporarily adjourning the meeting. It's 1 minute.
ICE out of Kane County. 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 Where did Kane go? ICE out of Kane County. ICE out of Kane County. ICE out of Kane County. Let's just.
I would not start pushing people out of it as long as they're not hitting anybody, fisticuffing and so forth. If they want to stand there for a while, crowd dismissed, that kind of thing. So don't remove anybody. Just stand here. The commissioner can leave. Yeah, that's what we want you here for. We can move.
We are here to demand the separation of families. We're here to demand. It's very easy for some of the members to just walk away for something that they have done. You guys are terrorizing our communities. Every single day, members of my community are taken away due to a contract that you signed. Every single day, a father is taken away. Families are torn apart for a contract that you signed without asking us. It is our taxpayer that pays for that, and I want that to end today. It is very easy for some of you members to walk away and leave us here. That shows how irresponsible it is of you, and that you continue to disrupt our families, and we are here to ask that you end that contract. We are not going to walk away until that contract is ended today. Amen.